Hey everyone, welcome back to the Lookout. Today is the 5th of July, and here's your Northern California Fire Report. It's brought to you by Q-Tech, Water Axe, and Firebox, all manufacturers of high-quality wildland firefighting equipment. I personally use all this stuff from these guys, and I can testify that I'm glad they're my sponsors because they make good equipment. So we're going to talk about ongoing lightning fires here in NorCal. It's been about 5 days since our first kind of initial bust. And most of the fires that have access have been wrapped. Even the kind of larger ones like the horse fire have been fairly well contained. But we've got a couple fires that are just way out there in the middle of nowhere that are likely going to be with us for a while. Two main ones we're going to talk about today are the Summit Fire burning up by Etna. We're going to talk about the Green Fire, which is burning kind of west of Brown Mountain, north of Shasta Lake. So both burning in places that many people never will ever see. So we're going to talk a bit about the geography of both the fires. And I spent the day kind of looking at the Green Fire. Got a friend out there who I talked to who gave me some good intelligence. And we covered that area extensively last year during the Shoe Fire. So we're going to talk about the Shoe. We're going to talk about this fire. And so if you're interested in, I kind of feel like we've got a little series here. Each season is like, we have seasons on the Lookout. And so checking back to last season, closing episodes, we were talking about the Shoe Fire and went in depth on that. So if you're interested in kind of this season's episodes, this is kind of one of our first episodes on the ongoing saga of the Green Fire. And so if you want to do your background, go back and check out our Shoe Fire coverage from last fall. Also, we wrote a long blog post about the Green Fire today on thelookout.org. And I'm trying to kind of put a little more love into the website because I think a lot of the stuff is good in writing with reference. When we first started, we didn't do YouTube at all. We wrote articles and we posted lots of maps. And love the YouTube, and I'll keep doing it. But we can get in kind of greater depth, add more links and everything on the website. So wrote a pretty good article today, I think, about the background of land management and everything else in the Green Fire area. And those are the things that are going to kind of set the context for what's going to make this story about the Green Fire kind of interesting and hopefully kind of intertwined with lots of other stuff we talk about. So to jump kind of right into the maps today, we're going to be talking about lots of action on here. Green, which is kind of between Redding and Bernie off of 299. There's a road that cuts across from Montgomery Creek or Round Mountain, I can't remember which, over to near Lakehead. And it goes across this area that otherwise is really remote and has very few roads. So talk about Green. We're not going to talk much about the rest of the fires except Summit because Horse Fire looks like it's pretty much done. The Helena Fire also doesn't look like it's doing much. There's some new fires like the Tom that flared up today that they jumped on pretty quick that don't have a lot to report. We'll talk a little bit about the Butler and Jacket, and we'll talk quite a bit about Summit. We're not going to talk about the Madre Fire just because the Madre Fire burned like crazy for a couple of days, and now it's kind of just chunking around up in the high country where there's fuel. But we don't have a lot of good intel from that, and that fire seems like it's kind of wrapping itself up with lots of help from firefighters. Another thing that we got today that was useful was got a good satellite image from Sentinel. Sorry, I hate having to hunt around here for stuff. That also kind of helps tell a story. So we're going to start off our coverage of the Green Fire with this satellite image that was shot today at noon. So we've got Lake Shasta. We've got up here all these clear cuts are private timberland. A lot of this burned in 1992 in the Fountain Fire. You can see kind of where there's clear cuts and then there's no clear cuts. And a lot of the land kind of between these clear cuts hasn't been clear cut because it all burned in 92. Was all salvage logged and replanted. So like you got this huge area out here kind of above Montgomery Creek that's ginormous tree farm, contiguous trees that are all like about 32 years old. And we'll talk about why that matters in this discussion of this fire here. So the green fire. What we love about the satellite imagery is it's kind of hard for people to kind of grok how a forest fire actually burns, and that it's actually, forest fires burn as lots of small individual fires, basically. Sometimes they're bigger than others. But this image captured at noon kind of shows you that of green, where you can see that there's kind of this flank over here that was not active at all. And then the fire was really kind of actively pushing up the ridges and up into a bowl here. But at noon, there was portions of the fire that just didn't have much heat. They did pull some of the crews off this side of the fire today just because they didn't really feel like they were getting an anchor here to on the rest of the fire. And with firefighting, it's really important that you kind of start somewhere that you can, ideally you start at a lake or something and you can start constructing a line and know that the fire's not going to come back around below you. And so on steep ground like this, you don't want to be fighting fire out in here with the potential for this fire to kind of come around below you. So it's kind of a very key point with firefighting is to anchor in, right? And so they had a couple crews on this side of the fire in a hell spot yesterday, and this morning they decided to pull those crews out. So I don't really know if there are still crews working on this fire or if it was mainly aerial attack today, but at some point today the decision was made that they weren't going to be able to engage directly on this fire, and they were going to go to kind of a plan B. So we're going to talk about green for a while now. Now that we've kind of got that kind of area context, this is the green fire, and it burned. Let me get up my perimeters here. So this perimeter that I've got here that's outlined in white is what was flown yesterday this morning at 1 a.m. And then the red perimeter is what was flown today at 1 p.m. So you can see that kind of in that time the fire kind of spread in just about every direction, slowly but on the move. And one of the reasons that they pulled the crews out is just the terrain it's really can be hard to tell from just a map, but the terrain out here is really steep and it's really rocky. And so there's no way to really get like bulldozers in here as a roadless area. And so they weren't, if you think about kind of being a crew down in here and you're trying to, scratch a line around this fire, not knowing if you're going to get winds coming up the canyon that are going to bring fire behind you. That's why, the lack of an anchor point on terrain like this is just how people get killed. And so even though the air tankers are able to slow this down, actually getting in here and scratching around the fire as it's burning under the retardant safely without an anchor point is just, it's really difficult. And so they bailed out a lot of the crews, don't know how many. So now the strategy is basically that they think that they're going to box it in using the Fender's Ferry Road here and the shoe fire. And we've got the shoe fire, bunch of stuff from our coverage of that last year. Gonna fire it up here. All right, so this area out here is where the shoe fire ended up when it was getting about done. And so this fire is going to burn up, and when it gets to the shoe fire, there's not going to be any fuel there. And so this blue line, Fender's Ferry Road, is where they prepped. Last year, they did a bunch of thinning along that road with chippers and crews in anticipation that the shoe fire might grow larger. So this often happens on a big fire like this. I think I've got a better shoe here for you, actually. Yeah, so that's the final extent of shoe. So this fire, with the terrain and kind of daily winds blowing it this way, is going to run into the shoe fire. And then the strategy as of this afternoon was to try to fire off of Fender's Ferry Road in the next couple days to create a buffer against this fire getting to it. So depending on what the weather does, that they might be able to, the timing on the firing operation is going to be driven by what the fire does. And so I talked quite a bit on our web post today about that that idea that how do you set your timing for a firing operation? Is this fire going to get here? This is 9 miles from here to Goose Gap. Is it going to get there in a day? We've seen fires run 5-10 miles a day, often in California during peak fire season when the fire and the fuels and winds all align. And so we're kind of at the mercy of the weather forecast for figuring that out. The fire spread models we have aren't incredibly sophisticated. I mean, they're crazy, high power, everything else, but the math behind them hasn't really changed in the last almost 50 years. And so when it comes down to it, like some of the biggest supercomputers running the best models still struggle to really tell you what a fire is going to do. It's just because oftentimes the weather data is really, it's at these kind of large, continental scales or statewide scales. And when it comes down to it, like the wind swirling around the micro topography is really what can drive the fire to make a little run and spot and torch and cast embers. So we're just really not there with the math and science and technology to really nail fire spread. So if they are going to fire this road, how are they going to do it? It's 6 miles. Likely they'll use drones, crews on foot, but in this kind of crews on foot along the road, but in this broken topography, the idea with firing is that you're trying to gain depth off of the road with the fire you light. In the old days, people would just just wait till the wind was blowing up the hill and walk along the road and rip it off the road. And that can be effective if the weather's in your favor, but it's also effective in killing every tree, kind of trapping wildlife, etc. So what's the preferred method now is to treat this more like a prescribed burn. In prescribed fire, if we were going to come out here and try to prescribe fire this, and we had access to drones, we would be dropping balls along the ridges, flaming kind of ignition balls that are like these ping pong balls that catch on fire after you drop them out of a drone. We would ping pong the ridges if we couldn't get people in there on foot, and then we would let the fire back down to us, and we'd either use hand lighting or shoot incendiary rounds off the road. But in prescribed burning, the goal would be to light this and let it back down to the road and control it when it got to the road. And so this is something that gets done a lot with prescribed fire. So a lot of the people that are kind of firing experts on operations like this have a lot of prescribed fire experience. One of the operations chief on this fire right now is a hotshot soup, and I met him when he was a burn boss trainee on a burn that I was working on. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of kind of portability back and forth between prescribed fire world and wildfire operations world. The difference is that oftentimes you're not going to come out here and try to do a prescribed burn in July. Next week, in a 10-day forecast, there's 8 days that are over 102 degrees in Redding for the next 10 days. And so it's really kind of not a great setup to try to put 6 miles of fire on the ground in the middle of July when you've got potential for it just sets up for bad things to happen. So that's one flank of it, and that's an important flank because if the fire, right now, the fire is going to run with topography and fuels, and it kind of depends on what our daily winds are like. Right now the fire hasn't become established in the bottom, and so we don't have a lot of slope working against us with the fire behavior on this, because right now the fire is kind of backing down and it makes little runs until today I think it'll probably burn this bowl out if it hasn't already. But what's going to change the game is when the fire gets down to the bottom here and then has terrain to run with. So, once the fire spots into here, then it can start making slope-driven runs with the wind pushing it. That's what we call alignment. That's when you can run up here and you can actually get a column on it, and then it spots to here. It spots down into here, runs up here with a column on it, spots to here. And that's often what causes our long range runs. Is it's not that the fire is going to go up, over, up, over, up, over. It's going to go whoop, spot, and hopscotch its way. So that's what causes long range fire movement, is spotting, new fire, run, spotting. And so the alignment could be worse for Fender's Ferry Road because it's not going to be making a run directly towards the road and spotting, but the fire is going to kind of run with terrain and make its way, and it's not a great setup because as the fire, unless they can get out ahead of it and start firing this ridge sooner than later, and building black up in here, that will act kind of as a buffer or to slow down runs that would be coming up. The fire is going to come on its own terms. So that's why the timing of what the fire is going to do here is really important, of whether or not they hold Fender's Ferry Road. I'd say it's kind of a toss-up. If they lose it at Fender's Ferry Road, then they've got roads and dozer line prepped on the next ridge here. But that's not a great prospect either, in that if they can't hold fenders, it means it's spotting across and it's making uphill aligned runs at this. And this is a mid-slope road. It's not a great alignment to hold the fire. So then what? Then it keeps going with the train, and it runs up towards this checkerboard land, which is politically a high priority not to burn up because it's owned by the largest landowner in the state, Sierra Pacific Industries. So we'll get there. We don't know. But Fender's Ferry, if they can hold it there, that'll be a nice catch. But it's easy. It looks easy on the map, right? And when it comes down to like coordinating a firing operation across over 6 miles of really, they've got good road access, but once you get off the road, if you get spots over here, it's really thick. So as we mentioned, the shoe fire, even though last year there was complaints about, indirect attack on this that allowed it to get as large as it did, the shoe fire now becomes this kind of handy catcher's mitt in this big game of catch the fire. So I guess one kind of beef that I've got about the shoe fire is that the shoe fire was burning last year, like in October, with really nice conditions, right? And we expended an enormous amount of effort and time to suppress it where it was suppressed. Whereas if that fire had been let to burn and had backed out across a larger landscape, then we'd have less portion of this landscape exposed now in July, moving into a heat wave, to the kind of catastrophic conditions that give us like massive high severity patches on things like the Park Fire or the Dixie Fire, right? So this idea of like letting fires burn under beneficial conditions is that you fireproof more of the landscape. If you look at the severity of the fire that we had last year on this image, like you can, in a lot of places, it burned out in here, you can barely tell what happened, right? Like blue is where there's intact vegetation. This is the high severity portions of the fire from last year, but the fire itself burned like this whole area. And so there was kind of this initial early run on the fire that was high severity. But a lot of this got underburned is what the forest needed. So it's frustrating that we're not better at, more flexible at letting fires burn in the fall when they're achieving beneficial effects and it's not 102 degrees. Anyway, these dozer lines are all still out there. Some of them they've all likely been rehabbed, meaning water barred, and some places they pull like brush and trees back over them. A lot of places are starting to do less rehab on dozer lines because the next year you get a fire and you need to use it again. But this landscape doesn't provide very many opportunities for kind of landscape scale fire catching. Okay, so the other thing that we got to look out for with green now that it's burning, and also why the Forest Service wants to put these fires out as small as possible. Let me turn a couple things off here. It's really easy to say they should let the fires burn and everything will be fine, but it's really impossible and that's why we don't do it, right? Is like the consequences, like now that this fire is burning and got away, there's going to be a lot of good fire effects from this fire, but there's also likely going to be a lot of patches that burn hot and threats and discomfort and smoke and worry. And that's because this is a really dynamic, wild part of the landscape. So we looked at the Fender's Ferry side, and this is, there's kind of a clear potential strategy on the Fender Ferry side that, hey, we got a major road system, it's been prepped already, we got good crew access, we got water down at the bottom. you can start to put together a plan based on that. But heading kind of out the peninsula here, this is all, surrounded by Lake Shasta, a little hard to see. But there's a road that goes out kind of along here, and then there's road access down here. But there's a large roadless area here. Like all this yellow has got no roads in it at all. And so the fire, there's not a lot of options. There's not dozer access. This is a research natural area that's there because it's limestone, like unique limestone kind of habitat. There's a lot of rare plants, and it's kind of a really cool area ecologically. But it's also roadless because it's super rugged. But anyway, not a lot of options to catch the fire going this way for quite a while. Maybe when it gets out to these roads out here. There's some old kind of like ridgetop dozer line type roads out here that, likely are going to get pushed. Same here. There's like an old ridgetop road / dozer line that'll likely get pushed. So that might give them a box to work with there. The problem with this fire and this alignment is that, as we talked about over the last couple of days, it's going to be 107 for like 4 days coming up in Redding. So out of the next 10 days, we've got like 107, 109, 107, 107, 107, 107, 107, right? So from Thursday to Wednesday, it's like 107 in Redding. So as we talked about, that creates the potential for this thermal low, that all this valley air rises up out of the valley, creates low pressure, and then at night, cool air up here on the Modoc Plateau is all going to come pouring down the Pitt River. And so that's going to come down here and be pushing on our fire. So if you're out here trying to light a backfire off this ridge, you're putting a bunch of fire on this ridge that points directly up the canyon. We like to light backfires at night because that's when we've got, generally cooler temperatures, lower humidities. So if the strategy here is to go and light this ridge on fire, and you light it on fire, and then you get like sustained 30-mile-an-hour down canyon winds, they're impinging directly on your fire. And there's potential for then it to run farther out this peninsula. And decent odds that if it does, it's going to spot across the lake. Because the lake out here is not super far across. Like 0.2 of a mile, so 1,000 feet. So definitely spottable, right? So that's kind of one of the riskier things with this fire now is what's going to happen on the south flank. Because if it does get across the lake over here, then it's exposed to up canyon afternoon winds that could carry it up into this country up in here, and then eventually into this timberland and up towards Round Mountain. So this is an extremely high fire hazard part of the landscape. Just because of the elevation and the direction it faces and everything else. And if we look at like the Fountain Fire in 1992, it started down here off of 299, and it ripped like 60,000 acres. It was one of the biggest. It was kind of one of the first mega fires in Northern California. And as I mentioned before, this is all now kind of young 30-year-old trees that are super thick and super prone to fire. So getting fire into anywhere in this neighborhood, midsummer, during a heat wave, bad news. Luckily, this part of the fire right now is the least active. We'll see what it looks like after today. But from midnight till noon, there's very low spread. But it's established in here. You'll probably get night down canyon winds today. Like, there's a lot of fire there. So, where are we going? I want to show some photos. Someone asked about fuels photos. And so let's go to some photographs. I got to do a really cool bike tour 2018 with my kid. There was it was called Run for Salmon, and the Winnemem Wintu tribe put together this kind of prayer walk and run from San Francisco Bay all the way to McLeod. And that's basically kind of trying to pray their salmon back home. So there used to be salmon that came up the McCloud River, and they're kind of, the Sacramento River has winter run salmon because there's super cold water year round on the McCloud from giant lava springs. So when they built the dam down here at Shasta, it blocked the salmon, and the salmon now pretty much are extinct in California. So they do this run every couple of years, and so we joined them on their run. We rode bikes and went with some horse people, and we went from down here around Jones Valley, and we followed the backbone up through this country, and we crossed Fender's Ferry Road and ended up over here at McCloud, about 60 miles. But I got photos from that I think show the fuels pretty well. So this is, if we're coming up the backbone here, and this is a fire that happened in this area, the Bear Fire, 2004, that we did the mapping on. But as you come up the backbone, you kind of come, it's just like classic California. You come out of kind of the foothill scrub of like live oak and grass, and then you get up here, and there's Sugar Pine Camp, which is a CDF, California Department of Corrections camp. And then you get into this kind of scabby forest land, and then eventually becomes some pretty nice ponderosa pine. And it's cedar, and it's really thick, right? So there's clear cuts out there, and then they're mixed with kind of the stuff that hasn't been touched yet. That's like super thick mix of kind of mixed conifer. And kind of one of the problems when we get fires into stands like this that are mixed is that it's super, there's no shade out here in these clear cuts. These fine fuels are super hot and dry, and you get a spot fire in here, and then like within like 10 minutes, you've got a 20-acre spot fire that then goes into the super thick veg on the edge of the clear cut that grows super thick there because there's tons of sun. And so this is kind of in this area between Sugar Pine Camp and Round Mountain, where we're kind of worried about if the fire does get into here. These clear cuts up here in this kind of heavy mixed conifer, it kind of looks like this. All right. So on that bike ride, we ended up dropping down Fender's Ferry Road here, and you get down to where it crosses. There's a dam on the pit right upstream, and so if they do try to contain the fire here on Fender's Ferry, how it gets across through here, like if they let it back down to the lake or not. This is kind of the view down the river of, so if they're going to try to bring it to the road here, looking downriver, it looks like this. And so you can see it's kind of classic firefighting along a river. We're usually pretty good at catching fires along major rivers. Heavy helicopters help a lot in that, and that oftentimes the fires kind of back down, even if they're torching off it's rarer that the fire like lofts embers and they cross the river. So you see a lot of major fires controlled on major rivers like this, which is good news. This is looking upstream at kind of like one of the last kind of diversion dams on the pit. The pit's like the Feather, it's like super straight-jacketed with hydroelectric dams. And then continuing up Fender's Ferry, you get the Goose Gap, and there's this real mix out here. Like all this light green you see in this area is dominated with California black oak. Black oak is really resilient to fire. And the thing to say about a fire that's going to burn in here is that it would be pretty hard for a fire to burn so hot that it's like causing permanent ecological damage, right? This land needs fire. Black oak it grows in places that are hot and get lots of fire. So even if this all burns, it's not going to be the end of the world. This is kind of along Fender's Ferry Road. And so you've got this kind of in the riparian, you've got heavy blackberry and maple and mixed conifer. And then so we're talking about backing fire down to Fender's Ferry Road. I mean, this is what it looks like. It's no picnic. It's super productive area that hasn't had fire or much management for a super long time. When you get to Goose Gap, this is kind of that mix of kind of classic mix of California, like oaks, Doug fir, cedar, ponderosa pine, needing lots of fire, not having had it for a long time. This is some more of that kind of area that we're worried about it coming up into the clear cuts on the south side of the river. It's just it's very productive. It hasn't been managed a lot. There are some projects talking about fuel breaks along the backbone. I don't know the status of those. this is kind of where we'd be talking about, like you're looking across the river here, and so where we talked about them potentially having dozer lines on the ridges. This is the kind of the peninsula here, down in here. So you can see there's been fires like this bear fire that left snags on the landscape 20 years ago now, and regrown with lots of grass and brush and youngish trees. This is more kind of as you get out farther to the west. And that's your fuels tour. Man, we got the wing nuts over here in the comments. The Euphrates River is gone. Judgment Day is now here upon all and all nations. I am the will of the Almighty Creator. Yahoo! Oh, man. Geez, people. I'm glad you're excited about that. I see it's all caps. William Palmer. Help us understand the context, brother. Anyway, that's the green. It's going to go for a while. We're going to keep talking about it. We're going to talk a lot about what the future might look for, like what the future might look like moving forward. You got this landscape here that's been super heavily industrially managed. With this was cut 10 years ago. This is cut 5 years ago. This hasn't been cut yet, and looks like the kind of garbage that I showed you earlier. And a lot of this is going to burn, whether these folks who are managing it like it or not. And so where do we go from there? Where, like, I am positive that in my career, this fountain fire scar will burn again before they manage to really get any trees out of there that are big enough to turn into a 2x4. And it might happen now. It might happen with this fire. We don't know. So that's a big thing that we're going to be looking at this whole season, and always, is forestry. There's millions, thousands and thousands of clear cuts out here that a lot of this land is burning up before the trees that are being grown there are going to be harvested. And what does the future look like? And also, we're going to talk about that with this fire. If this fire does jump Fender's Ferry and runs up here towards the Bagley fire, this is checkerboard land that all got salvage logged. The private land out here got salvage logged after 2012 fire. A lot of the public land out here burned hot, but not as hot in the shade. And so you got mosaic of interesting land that needs another fire that we can't give it because all this plantation land out here is susceptible to damage by fire. So incompatible, Forest Service actually calls this area here roadless because they never roaded it. And so, but how do you manage a landscape like this without fire? And when you can't use fire because you're going to burn up your neighbor's crop. There's a lot of uproar about selling public lands, but I think it's good to point out that in many parts of the country, the footprint of public ownership is broken, where either you have lands that you can barely access, or you have lands that you can't manage because of the neighbors' policies. And that I'm not opposed to selling public lands if it means that we can consolidate ownerships into chunks that make sense. That might be that we could sell public lands somewhere else that have trees on them to buy these lands here and reintroduce fire. So I think we need to be open, and that there's a great opportunity in the current kind of chaos of government to rethink some of these really intractable land management problems we have, like the checkerboard ownership. All right. Okay, so on that note, we're going to go to Summit. Thanks for your patience. And if you don't like the long-winded stuff, there's always Watch Duty. They're awesome. Not talking trash, but if you're looking for not long-winded, I'm not gonna shorten the broadcast. Sorry. Summit fire. We talked about this for days, right? I went back and watched what I'd said about this fire, just to kind of refresh myself, so I could try to be consistent, and to take responsibility. I try to highlight when I predict something correctly, and then and it actually happens, and I need to try to highlight when I get something wrong too. So here I said I thought the fire would stay within the basin. Still might be right, but technically it has spotted over the PCT. I think what I was trying to say on the first day, I said this was a stupid place to be a firefighter down here at the bottom of this, trying to keep the fire from going up the hill, because it was clear. It's clear to a lot of folks who do this that you very rarely succeed in trying to keep a fire that's even like 10 acres from going up the hill when the hill is covered with a 10-year-old burn scar full of dead and down logs and everything. So this fire is now burning out this basin. A lot of these trees here that survived the last fire are going to survive this fire, the flanking. They still have lines in there. I'm not sure like exactly what the crews are doing in there, but this fire, it's spotting around, it's burning actively. I think there's decent odds that this fire will get established in here. Hard to tell. But if it gets established in here, then it's just another front in which it could push over the top of the divide here and become well established on the top here. Right now they've had clouds over this fire today, which kind of help moderate the fire behavior. It's up pretty high. It's up like 7,000 feet. And so small things like the smoke hanging in front of the sun or clouds can really help moderate that fire effects. The hotter and drier weather, we're going to continue to get strong up canyon winds here. If the fire does chunk downward, it's got other places it can go. A lot of the spread models for this fire don't show it progressing east towards Etna. This all burned last year. So it'll be an interesting one to keep watching. There's a lot of resources on it. Or I'll take it back. I don't know what resources are on it. There's a lot of competition from all the different fires for things like hotshot crews right now. For things like helicopters and new starts. New starts usually get a priority for the heavy helicopters because if you can keep a new start small, you can save yourself a lot of work. But it's interesting to look at where the spots are on this, how far out they can actually get, even under not very extreme conditions. So that's a summit fire. We're going to jump over to the webcams and kind of look at our different fires real quick. This is the green fire over the last 12 hours. You can see that we had kind of the normal down canyon winds here looking down the Pitt River. And at around noon, they started to switch, and the fire kind of smoked itself out for up until about 2 o'clock. And then in the afternoon, the smoke is no longer shading the fire, and the fire is active to churn and burn and do some of its best spreading. This was another fire that burned south of McLeod called whatever it is, Tom Fire. That one they got right on top of, and they did a drop or two, and then they decided they didn't need the tankers. They had a couple engines there. So that's kind of south of McLeod, about 10 miles. Looking at the Helena fire, that fire was really mellow today. We didn't really hear about much of anything happening there. Now there's the camera in Wairika is looking at a fire actually in town. First they're looking at our fire. This is a summit fire out here. That's just kind of chugging along, not super dramatic. And then they must have popped the fire in town because there you go. This Fort Jones camera. We use this a lot to look at stuff that's happening over the other side of Etna. Seems like there's always like a fire right behind the post in the camera. But compared to the last few days, you don't see a lot of cumulus buildup up around Shasta. Pretty calm weather. Okay. So that's the summit. These are our fires since 2020. And over here we've got the Jacket Fire, which is burning. So we're coming down here to Orleans, Soames Bar, and the Salmon River. The Jacket Fire looks like it got pretty much wrapped. They think they have hose all the way around it. And they painted that super heavy with retardant. Butler Fire up here on the top. It spread minorly in every direction kind of between midnight and when this virus was flowing. What was that? It's not doing much. It's up on top of a hill with a new fire right next to it, 2023 perch fire. The models, like I said, the models aren't very great. You ask the models what the Butler fire is going to do in the next week, and it shows like it burning like 10,000 acres, which we know that's not going to happen. So I don't think that means that we need a bunch of computer people to work on more models for us, really. Like I said, a lot of these problems don't have technical solutions. They're cultural problems. They're problems that regard where people live and the condition of the vegetation and land ownership and everything else around where they live that makes it hard for them to get right with fire. Someone's asking if I pay attention to Canadian wildfires, and I don't. I can't get it. I mean, I'll try when things aren't happening here, but it's pretty hard to cover everything. Okay, I just got to look at my list. I think we covered everything. Kind of feel like we got to pace ourselves. Like green's going to be going on for a while, and we will study it and tell you about it. I'm trying to do live streams in the evening. I used to do them in the morning, but now I'm trying to sleep. So if things get really hectic, we'll change our schedule. But right now, kind of settling into doing evening briefings gives me time during the day to kind of figure out what's going on. So I have something to show you guys. Like I said before, the website is kind of the place to go to get more in depth and to kind of. We've got a lot of stuff on here. So just if you're interested in firing operations, come over here and click on firing operations, and lots of articles that talk about firing. Oh, sorry. Green fire is going to be pretty big. Keith Cody says, do another hour. What do you want to talk about? Hey, check it out while you're here. We got hats. We got stickers. We got mugs that my wife makes. We're going to sell metalwork on here. These are ways to support the Lookout. Sorry it's all sold out right now. I'm busy doing other stuff. But also going to do hoodies, Lookout hoodies. And they're not going to be cheap because we're going to go for the Carhartt. But lots of ways to support the Lookout. That's on our website. We also have t-shirts. Somewhere. I don't see them on there. Sorry. We're going to make better t-shirts, I swear. And check out our sponsors, QTAC, WaterX, and Firebox. Thanks for the donations. Mark Sorensen wants to hear about fire-sensitive tree species, Doug fir versus Pondo versus sugar pine. Let's look at our photos then. Oh, this is a photo that I didn't share. That's slash and a clear cut, kind of as you get closer to the McCloud River. So the timber companies, it costs a lot of money to pick up slash, and it's not right at the top of their priorities. Sometimes they do better than others. But there's one reason that clear cuts burn vigorously is often there's logging slash in them, which is basically just big piles of kindling. And there's a question about flammability of different tree species. So we've got this is mixed conifer, and it's what we'd call short needle litter. So fir needles, sugar pine needles, cedar needles, they're shorter and less lofty than ponderosa pine needles. And so as such, they kind of retard, fires don't spread as fast in them as they do in just pure pine litter. Pine litter burns like a little more like grass. Um, Ponderosa pine litter, it's light, it's fluffy, it's got a lot of kind of volatiles in it. So even though you have these super crazy thick forests in this mixed conifer, unless the fire is unless there's wind, oftentimes like when we underburn this stuff, it's hard to get it to spread very fast in the in the short needles. So Doug fir forests, surface fires move slower than ponderosa pine forests. Ponderosa pine are kind of traditionally open, more kind of dry, deserty. And so in this country, you have a lot of mixed conifer, in part because the elevation. So like when we look at where we're at here, there's like the classic kind of transition in California, like all up and down the Sierra Nevada. Like if you're in Shingletown, you go through like the Blue Oak. Thank you, Google. Down low, you go through the Blue Oak zone, which is just grass and blue oak, and then you get into like this really scary mixed this is like live oak and gray pine. And if you're looking to buy a house in California, like if you can see a gray pine tree, formerly known as digger pine, from your house, like it's not a fire safe place to live, probably. Like this is kind of going up to Cohasset, going up to Forest Ranch, going up to Auburn, going up to what do you call it? Shingle Springs. Like this zone is maximum brush, maximum heat, maximum gray pine, and maximum danger. And then eventually you kind of get out of that zone and you get up onto kind of like more like here you can just see you got grass, you got live oak. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. We're going to Shingletown. So you come out of this kind of scabby, shallow soil, hot, dry front country, and you start to get up into the black oak and ponderosa pine. And black oak is not terrible as far as flammability. And ponderosa pine, it tells you that you're in a place that gets more moisture and has better soil. So when you get into the ponderosa pine, the problem is that it's so productive that the brush is growing like crazy. But this is like that classic transition. You start off in, sorry, I know it's a little kind of car sick driving here. Start off in the valley, you got the grass, you got the live oak. You get up into the pines like around Shingletown. And as you get higher, and Shingletown, by the way, is they're doing a ton of work to reduce fire hazards around the community, like no other place. But there's still like some really crazy neighborhoods where the fuels are insanely thick. Trees everywhere. And what we know is that trees this dense, even if you thin out below them, can like wreak havoc during a fire. So as you get higher up into like 3,000 feet or so, 3,500, then you get into what we call the mixed conifer. And the mixed conifer is like more the cedar, the fir, the sugar pine. You start seeing more cedar. So this is your classic transition for like all of California, from Bakersfield to the Oregon border. As you move up in elevation, you go through these same sequences: grass, oak, gray pine, black oak, ponderosa pine, cedar, Doug fir. And when you get up to the kind of the highest elevations, you get into like white fir and red fir. So each of those vegetation types has like a fire regime, what we call fire regime, how often it used to burn. The foothills and the kind of lower elevations used to burn quite often. But you get up on top of like, get up to like 7,000 feet or something, and then it was more infrequent. You'd have big fires maybe every 100 years and a big drought. And that's kind of what happened with the Dixie Fire, was that we lost a lot of high elevation fir forest just because we were in a kind of like at the end of a multi-year drought, critically dry, and oftentimes you just can't get a fire to burn very well in red fir unless it's a drought and exceptionally hot summer or something like that. So that the concern really here on the green fire, the biggest concern I have is that if these down canyon winds blow it up out in here and it gets across down in this kind of really scabby front country timberland, it's going to be a really difficult firefight. And it's got potential to do bad things. You know, the time of year that we're in, you think the Dixie fire started maybe in the second week in July. We've got a lot of season out ahead of us. And so that's the thing to watch. I mean, it won't be the end of the world if this fire goes up and burns up into the Bagley fire. It'll be bad for SPI. A lot of the stuff up here that burned in 2012 on the fed land, if it gets burned again, it might be actually good for it. But it will be destructive for young trees in these lands that were reforested 12 years ago. But there's not very many people living out there. Most of the people live on the other side of the Pitt River. So that's kind of like what to watch for on this fire is if the fire crosses the Pitt River, then it's going to start to really be, and you can see here, this yellow dots are structures. You can see that kind of civilization is clustered along the 299 corridor. And as you come around here, there's people up, towards Big Bend, etc. And there's people scattered out in here, but like there's very few people living out in this country. So we'll keep an eye on that. What's the blue-gray shading? I don't know. I'm not sure what that was. I'm going to meter it out. I can talk for days. But what I'll leave on is fire history tells you about what's burned recently, where there's a lot of fuel, what hasn't burned recently. And what we see here is that there's no fire history in this ground, no large fire history. It means it's primed and that fire wants to fill in the gaps, the puzzle pieces. And this fire over here, the fountain fire, is old enough that this will burn as if there's no fire. This, like the shoe fire, the 12-year-old fire, the fuels are different enough from having a fire in there that it will affect how the fire behaves. But when the fires start to get into like 20 or 30-year-old area that's burned, it really either doesn't make a difference or it makes it worse. So this is a huge liability for whoever owns it. Long odds that it'll grow to fruition. And in the meantime, huge amount of effort has been spent by like a whole generation of foresters trying to reforest this after the 1992 burn. So plantation forestry is sketchy in fire-prone areas, and we go to great lengths to keep fire out of private timberlands. But sometimes, the weather, the resource availability, all that conspires, and eventually a fire kind of threads the needle, and we get it. So that's what we're looking for in the green fire. Now it's time to rest. Thank you all, and check out the website. And thank the sponsors. I need a producer. Thanks. Bye.